I am a huge Souls fan. I've been playing the games for over 10 years now, have been a Fromsoftware fan in general ever since their inception, and even have a channel that was primarily dedicated to Souls-like games for years. And as a longtime fan of Fromsoftware, I've really enjoyed games influenced and inspired by elements of Souls. Some of these include Nioh, which is Dark Souls cross Ninja Gaiden, Blasphemous, Salt and Sanctuary, and many other Metroidvania games that have taken additional influence from the Souls games, with Hollow Knight being my personal favorite and a standout. Silksong, where are you? But the thing is, as much as I absolutely adore Dark Souls, Bloodborne, and Elden Ring, a lot of Souls-like games I've played haven't gotten it quite right for me. That was until I played Lies of P. Lies of P, in some ways, feels like the most Fromsoftware Souls-like I've ever played. And what's interesting to me is that I actually went into playing the game not particularly wanting to like it. I've never been the biggest fan of Pinocchio in any iteration of its story that I've seen, so in general, this didn't seem like a game that would appeal to me, Dave. So I think it would be interesting to break down what elements of Lies of P make it feel so much like a Fromsoftware game. While many people love to talk about the Souls games in terms of their lore or difficulty, ultimately, the core gameplay at its heart is in its combat design. When Demon's Souls first came out, popular third-person action games were more akin to Devil May Cry, God of War, or Ninja Gaiden, games which were heavily based around stringing together successful combos. However, Demon's Souls and subsequently Dark Souls, Bloodborne, and Elden Ring slowed this down. They added a stamina meter that you'd have to keep track of, as you would no longer be able to string together endless combos with no repercussions. Instead, you'd have to track your stamina, which is also how you'd be able to defend or dodge to safety. Akin to this, your character had a greater sense of weightiness to their attacks. Even in Bloodborne, which is definitely faster paced, each swing has to be deliberate, and missing means you could be opening yourself up to punishment. Now, this has become standard for games emulating the Souls-like genre. But the thing that a lot of these games are missing is that sense of weightiness to combat that FromSoftware Souls games captures so well, and Lies of P nails that aspect. The weapons in Lies of P feel properly weighted, and both the player and enemies have a little snappiness to their attacks. This snappiness is part of what makes the attacks feel good. There's a period of both characters and enemies drawing back their weapon for their attacks, and when they do attack, regardless of weapon, it's sudden, deliberate, and hard. And I think this is a big part of what goes into making an attack feel good, as opposed to just a generic looking swing. My favorite example of this is Fire Emblem 7 for the GBA. If you watch the attacks on those games, they feel powerful and strong, and that's all thanks to the animation slowing down for the draw of an attack and speeding up during the attack, which makes them feel extra powerful and look more visually interesting. It's trickier to do in a responsive action game, but I think that's where Souls, and by extension, Lies of P succeeds. On top of this, enemies have a certain amount of poise that you can break. Heavier weapons are typically able to stun them and break their attack sequence. All of this adds to the overall game feel, which I'll touch on later. Sticking to the combat here, as that's really the heart of these games, let's touch on the enemies. Part of what makes the Souls games work so well is that enemies have tells. Think Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! Is one of the NES's best games, and the entire game is just responding to enemy tells. The player will see a boxer come up on screen, give a brief window showing what their attack will be, and the player responds by blocking, dodging, or attacking. As the game goes on, these tells become shorter and the player will have to be much quicker to respond. And this, at its core, is Dark Souls. As soon as you see an enemy, your options are to quickly attack before they have a chance to, or wait for an attack and respond. And what makes the system work is that the enemies all have deliberate tells. Once you see the tell, you can either respond with a parry, block, dodge away, or try to attack before they can execute their attack. It's Punch-Out! Just with some extra complexities to it. Now this is where Lies of P gets a little dicey. The enemy's tells can be so long that it starts to become more about memorization rather than reaction. But this criticism aside, this element is in there and works properly. and is absolutely vital to making a game have that FromSoft feel. We are climbing up this combat ladder to the very top, and I mean bosses. Like Souls, Lies of P has wild and terrifying bosses that will test every element of combat that you've learned. This means reading and memorizing boss tells, learning how to respond properly, and punishing the boss during openings. And of course, if you mess up during a boss fight, you will be punished to a far greater extent than during a normal encounter. Unlike enemies, most bosses can't be stunned and really require the player to dance with them. Again, it's Punch-Out, but with longer lasting battles, a larger swath of movesets you'll have to memorize, and a game of reacting, responding to openings, and then going back to waiting for the boss to attack. This is part of the secret sauce of what makes Souls battles tick, and gives players this sense of accomplishment, like they improved and overcame. Every boss has a new pattern you'll have to learn, and when you've mastered it, you'll be able to replay the game and destroy bosses far easier, because you'll still have some muscle memory for how to defeat the boss and understanding of how to punish its moveset. It's also what makes the games feel fair. When you know a boss moveset and how to respond, that's always going to be the correct response. The game won't throw a curveball at you, and hopefully, each boss you defeat reinforces ways you should be playing the game and will help you grow as a player for future, more difficult segments. Corpse runs, or running back to where you died to collect dropped items, and Estus flasks are two elements that have pretty much become staples of Souls-likes and not unique to Lies of P, but they are still integral elements. Corpse runs weren't unique to Souls games, but they did drastically popularize them, and it's an easy way to make your game get that Souls-like stamp of approval. The game constantly autosaves, and when you die, you don't lose any progress. Instead, you'll drop all of your currency and have one chance to return to the spot of your death and pick back up that currency. In Souls fashion, this currency is what you use to both level up and purchase new items. To my understanding, before Demon Souls, this idea was only in the realm of MMORPGs. Meanwhile, RPGs and action games typically had save points, or let you save the game anywhere, but if you died after this save, all of your progress would be lost. In Demon Souls and future games, you'll still maintain items you picked up, unlock doors, and NPC progression, but only lose your currency. So in some ways, it's more intense than a standard RPG because your currency is always at risk of being forever lost. But in other ways, it's actually less punishing than other games because you do still maintain your in-game progression. All in all, it's a way to ramp up tension, but not necessarily make the game feel less fair. And of course, Lies of P also implements corpse runs, and therefore includes that easier to hit design philosophy from Souls games. Again, an obvious one, but it's also something that makes the Souls genre tick. Now, not every Souls game has done it, but since Dark Souls, Estus flasks, or the idea of them, have been a staple of the series. These items serve as your way to heal and only refill when you rest at a checkpoint, or kill a mob in Elden Ring. You can find more Estus flasks over time and eventually grow how much the flasks heal you. Really though, it serves as another way to create tension in the games over any other form of healing. As you can only refill your Estus at checkpoints, it means that the further away you get, the more in danger you are. They act as a way to limit the number of times you, as a player, can fail before escaping to a checkpoint or losing to a boss, and when you're low on them, it's instant tension. So, of course, we see this in Lies of P. Something the Souls games have all been excellent at is in its environmental design. Not only do the environments tell a story and feel lived in, but the levels are built like 3D mazes. They typically wrap amongst themselves with doors you'll unlock as you progress further to open shortcuts to earlier connected segments. All of this is especially important as the game plays with the tension of how far you are from your bonfire or checkpoint and weaving you back in clever ways to the very same checkpoint you started at. This interwoven design is also present in Lies of P, and again helps make it achieve that Souls-like feel. Take the Lorenzi arcade. You'll find a central hub with your checkpoint and multiple paths in front of you, but can only take one at first. Slowly, you'll weave underneath to lower wine cellars and back up top and eventually open up locked doors back to the hub, and all while unlocking these new paths. The game also utilizes interesting elements of its levels to create pathing, whether it's running across the rooftops of Moonlight Town or going in and out of apartments in Rosa Isabella Street. Now, as far as the world design goes, Lies of P is more akin to Demon Souls, Bloodborne, or Dark Souls 2, with branching paths that aren't really fully connected, a la Dark Souls 1. Atmosphere is an integral part of what makes FromSoftware's environments feel so good. This also means not only do the environments tell a story, which makes them meaningful, but they also are able to elevate the game by making the players feel a certain way. Enter Firelink Shrine from Dark Souls, Majula from Dark Souls 2, or Hotel Krat in Lies of P, and you should immediately get a sense of peace and calm. This is your respite in a world of darkness and danger. The streets of Krat feel dangerous and dire. You can see dead bodies rotting in alleyways, making the city feel more dilapidated and dangerous even if there are no enemies. The atmosphere has already raised the tension. Whether you're in a harsh factory, the rainy Malum district, or St. Frangelico's cathedral which is oozing with corruption, each environment stands out and elicits specific emotions. So from both an atmospheric standpoint and a level and environmental design standpoint, Lies of P nails that feeling that FromSoftware games evoke.
Close your eyes.
Interestingly, Lies of P also borrows heavily from Sekiro. Unlike Souls, and similar to Sekiro, when you parry enemies, it deflects their weapon, and there's a stamina system attributed to this where you can break an enemy's guard from enough deflections. In Lies of P, the system works differently in that it serves as a way to add some more damage to the enemy in service of its more Souls-like system. But the real reason I'm including this section here is that parrying in Lies of P feels good and weighty. Deflecting an enemy sequence, with a combination of the game's sound effects and visual design through sparks that shoot out and certain enemy weapons showing damage before they potentially snap and break, all make the mechanic feel responsive. And that responsiveness is something other games I've played in the Souls-like hemisphere have missed the mark on, but Lies of P is actually able to succeed in. It all plays into, really, the most important aspect here, and that is
Les flocons de neige qui brillent dans le ciel.
I've touched on some of the elements that make up the overall game feel, but let's get into it a little more. The weightiness of the combat and the fact that there's a pull back to the weapons, then sudden acceleration during a swing is something that the Souls games do and Lies of P also pulls off. It's what makes the weapons feel weighty, powerful, and speedy all at once. The game is also responsive. As I mentioned in the Sekiro segment, your character doesn't feel clunky. Even though there's a weightiness to the action itself, the player moves around briskly, there isn't a weird delay to actions, you don't oddly move forward more than it feels like you should, and you aren't magnetized to enemies in overwhelming amount. You see, enemies will probably magnetize themselves to you when attacking, just like you'll do so to them when you choose to target them, as this is what makes them more challenging and will require you to actually dodge or respond in time. If enemies didn't magnet to you at all when attacking, it would be incredibly easy to just walk around them. But there's also a balance that needs to be struck. If an enemy just attached themselves to you completely, you wouldn't be able to escape, you'd see them drag across the ground in unnatural ways, and it would destroy the overall game feel. Similarly, when you're attacking enemies, if you magnet to them too much, you could potentially jolt forwards or go into danger you're not expecting, like falling off the side of a cliff. The Souls games have done a great job at striking this balance, and so too has Lies of P. Another factor at play here is the camera distance from the player. Get in too close and the focus will be on the action, but at a loss of seeing and being able to react to the environment. Too far and you'll lose the ability to play and react to enemies' exact attacks and tells. In my opinion, there isn't a correct answer to the camera distance question, but Lies of P seems to exactly mimic the distance of Bloodborne, helping to give it that FromSoftware feel. Regardless on your feelings of Lies of P overall, as it does have some issues in my opinion, it absolutely nails that feeling of playing a FromSoftware game. In my opinion, Lies of P cracked the Souls genre. But how do you feel about the game, and is there another one out there you think really nailed it and hit that FromSoftware feeling?